In the heart of the rugged Colorado wilderness, where the air is thick with the scent of pine and the earth still bears the scars of recent storms, a desperate cry pierced the silence. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the call of a bird. It was the faint, pleading whinny of a creature fighting for its life. Daniel Foster, a man who had spent years seeking solace in the solitude of his ranch, knew that sound all too well. It was the cry of a wild Mustang Foal, trapped in the unforgiving grip of a swamp. What followed was a rescue that would not only save a life, but also forge an unbreakable bond between man and beast, a bond that would defy the very laws of nature. What makes this story unforgettable is its powerful message of trust and survival. It's a tale of how even the wildest hearts can learn to trust, and how the bonds between humans and animals can transcend fear and instinct. Through Daniel's courage and Storm's resilience, we are reminded that sometimes the greatest connections are formed in the most unexpected ways. If you love heartwarming stories of courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring tales. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the story of Daniel and Storm and discover how one act of kindness changed everything. Have you ever experienced a connection with an animal that changed your life? Let us know in the comments below. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp earth as Daniel Foster made his way through the outskirts of his ranch. The recent storms had left the land soaked, turning the lowlands into dangerous pockets of mud and water. Daniel, a man in his early 40s, had spent most of his life alone after leaving the military. He found solace in the quiet of the Colorado wilderness, managing a small ranch where he rehabilitated injured animals before releasing them back into the wild. As he adjusted the saddle on his horse, Shadow, a sudden desperate sound cut through the air. It was faint but unmistakable, a cry for help. Daniel froze, his trained instincts kicking in. He scanned the horizon, searching for the source of the noise. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the call of a bird. This was different, weaker, strained, almost pleading. Without hesitation, he mounted Shadow and urged him forward. The powerful stallion responded immediately, galloping toward the sound. As they approached the marshland at the edge of his land, the sight before him made his heart drop. A small wild Mustang Foal was struggling in the mud, sinking deeper by the second. Its tiny legs were trapped in the thick muck, and with each attempt to free itself, it only became more entangled. The foal was covered in mud up to its chest, its eyes wide with terror. Daniel's mind raced. He had seen full-grown horses get stuck in mud like this before, and most of them never made it out. But this foal was too young to die like this. Dismounting in one swift motion, Daniel grabbed a rope from his saddle. He knew he had to act fast. If the foal exhausted itself completely, it would lose the will to fight, and once that happened, it would be over. Kneeling just at the edge of the swamp, Daniel called out in a calm but firm voice, "Hey, little guy, you're going to be okay. Just hold on." The foal flailed, its breathing ragged. Daniel could feel the ground shift beneath him as he inched closer. The mud was treacherous, thick, and unrelenting. He knew if he wasn't careful, he could get stuck too. Looping the rope, he tossed it carefully around the foal's front legs. The moment it tightened, the foal panicked, thrashing wildly. "Easy, easy," Daniel soothed, pulling gently but firmly. "I've got you." The foal let out a sharp whinny, but something in Daniel's voice seemed to cut through its fear. It stopped struggling just long enough for Daniel to pull hard. Beads of sweat formed on Daniel's brow as he pulled with every ounce of strength he had. His boots dug into the soft ground, his muscles burning. Shadow, sensing the urgency, let out a sharp neigh and instinctively pulled alongside Daniel, using his own weight to help. With one final desperate pull, the foal broke free. The small horse collapsed on his solid ground, shaking violently from exhaustion. Daniel fell back, panting, his heart hammering in his chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. Just the sound of the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the soft, exhausted breaths of the foal filled the air. Then slowly, the Mustang lifted its head its mud-streaked face meeting Daniel's eyes. Something passed between them in that instant. A silent understanding, a connection neither of them expected. Daniel reached out, his fingers barely grazing the foal's soaked mane. "You're safe now," he murmured. The foal didn't run, it didn't flinch. It simply stared at him as if it somehow knew this man had just saved its life. But Daniel had no idea that this rescue was only the beginning. What would happen next would defy everything he thought he knew about wild Mustangs. The foal lay trembling on the solid ground, its small chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. Daniel crouched beside it, his heartbeat still pounding from the effort of the rescue. The mud clung to its sleek coat, a mix of dark brown and white, barely visible beneath the layers of grime. It was young, too young to be alone. Daniel reached out again, slower this time. His fingers barely brushed against the foal's soaked mane before the tiny Mustang flinched. Instinct kicked in, its legs twitched, and it attempted to stand, but the effort was weak. It had spent too much energy fighting for its life. "Easy, little guy," Daniel murmured, his voice calm. "You don't need to run. You're safe now." The foal's ears flicked, registering his tone. It lifted its head slightly, its dark eyes still full of fear. Daniel could only imagine what had happened. Had it gotten lost from its band? Had something spooked them, forcing them to leave it behind? The idea of a Mustang foal wandering alone was unsettling. A Mustang without its herd was as good as defenseless. Daniel glanced toward Shadow. His loyal stallion stood a few feet away, watching the interaction with silent understanding. Horses knew things, felt things in a way that people couldn't always understand, and Shadow was patient. He knew that right now, the foal needed reassurance, not pressure. Still, Daniel couldn't just leave it here. The nearest wild horse band roamed miles away, and if the foal had been abandoned, it wouldn't last the night. Even if its mother had been nearby, the scent of the swamp would make it nearly impossible for them to track each other down. Daniel sighed, pushing himself up. "All right, kid," he said. "Looks like you're coming with me." The foal flinched again, attempting to move, but its legs wobbled dangerously. It wasn't going anywhere fast. Daniel untied the rope from his saddle and looped it loosely around the foal's neck. The last thing he wanted was to make it panic, but he needed a way to guide it home. With slow, steady movements, he pulled gently. The foal resisted at first, but was too weak to put up much of a fight. It took a few unsteady steps, its legs trembling beneath it. "That's it," Daniel encouraged. "Come on, you can do this." Shadow let out a soft snort, as if approving. The foal took another step, then another. It staggered but didn't fall. Daniel kept his movement steady, not pulling too hard, just enough to give the foal something to follow. The return to the ranch was slow. The foal's exhaustion was evident, and Daniel had to stop a few times to let rest. It had been through a battle today, a fight for its life, and it needed time to recover. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the wide expanse of land. The air smelled of fresh hay and pine, a stark contrast to the swamp's decay. Shadow walked toward his paddock as if sensing his job was done. Daniel, however, turned toward the barn. The foal needed warmth, food, and rest. Once inside, Daniel spread fresh hay in an open stall and removed the rope. The foal didn't bolt, a sign that it was too exhausted or maybe just starting to trust him. Daniel filled a bucket with water and placed it near the foal. It hesitated, then lowered its head and took a long, shaky sip. "Good," Daniel murmured, watching closely. The foal's body relaxed slightly, as if realizing for the first time that it was safe. Daniel leaned against the stall door, studying the young horse. It was small but strong, a fighter. "You need a name," he mused aloud. He thought for a moment before smirking. Storm. It was fitting. The foal had survived the storm that nearly took its life, and somehow Daniel had a feeling this little Mustang had a lot more fight left in him. The night passed quietly in the barn, but Daniel barely slept. He sat outside Storm's stall, watching over the fragile foal as it shifted uneasily in the fresh hay. Every so often, the young Mustang would stir, letting out soft whinnies, its legs twitching as if still trapped in the swamp. It was still fighting for survival, even in its dreams. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. He had seen this kind of trauma before, not just in animals, but in people too. The ones who had fought to survive carried their battles long after they were safe. The barn was dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from the wooden beam, casting flickering shadows along the walls. The scent of hay and leather mixed with the faint, lingering musk of swamp water. Storm shifted again, his little body adjusting to the warmth of the barn. He was clean now. Daniel had taken the time to wipe away the thick mud that had once covered him, revealing a sleek, dark coat beneath the grime. A true wild Mustang. Despite the foal's exhaustion, there was still fire in its eyes, and Daniel knew that fire wouldn't burn out easily. Morning came with a challenge. At dawn, a rooster's call echoed across the ranch, signaling the start of a new day. Daniel stretched his muscles, stiff from a night on the barn floor. He pushed himself up, rolling his shoulders before checking on Storm. The foal blinked sleepily at him, but didn't move much. It was clear he was still recovering. "Morning, kid," Daniel said softly, crouching by the stall door. "How we feeling?" Storm flicked his ears, but didn't answer, which made Daniel chuckle. He grabbed a small bucket of milk replacer, something foals needed when separated from their mothers. Setting it down near Storm, Daniel waited, knowing this would be a test. Would Storm accept help, or would the wild in him refuse? The foal eyed the bucket wearily. Instinct told him to seek his mother's milk, but she wasn't there. The smell of the formula wasn't the same, and his hesitation made Daniel's stomach twist. If the foal refused to eat, he wouldn't survive. "Come on, Storm," Daniel coaxed, his voice calm. "I know it's not what you're used to, but it's what you need." Storm lowered his head slightly, sniffing at the bucket. His nostrils flared, testing the unfamiliar scent. For a moment, Daniel thought he'd reject it, but then slowly, the foal began to drink. Relief washed over Daniel. "There you go, buddy," he murmured. "That's it. You're a fighter, huh?" Storm kept drinking, his body visibly relaxing as the nourishment settled into his empty belly. This was a good sign. But just as Daniel was beginning to feel at ease, a sudden sound startled them both. A distant neigh, sharp and urgent. Storm's ears shot up, and in an instant he was on his feet. Daniel stood too, his gut twisting. That wasn't Shadow, that was Wild, the band. His breath caught in his throat. If the band was nearby, it meant Storm's mother might still be out there, searching for him. Moving toward the barn door, Daniel stepped outside into the golden morning light. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and dust. His eyes scanned the land, his pulse quickening. And then he saw them, a group of wild Mustangs standing just beyond the tree line. A dozen powerful, untamed horses, their muscles rippling beneath sunlit coats. And at the front, a mare whose coat matched Storm's. Storm let out a shrill whinny, pushing against the stall door. His mother had come for him. Daniel felt torn. He had rescued the foal. He had fought to keep him alive. But Storm was wild. He didn't belong in a barn. His place was with his band. The mare called again, her desperate cry filling the morning air. Storm's little body trembled with instinct, his heart pulling him toward the only family he had ever known. Daniel's throat tightened. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. But why did it feel like he was losing something? The foal pawed at the ground, anxious, his body torn between the safety of the barn and the call of the wild. Daniel sighed, stepping forward. His boots crunched softly on the hay-covered floor. "All right, kid," he murmured. "You got a choice to make." Storm turned to look at him, dark eyes uncertain. The foal had begun to trust him. That much was clear. But trust and belonging were two different things. Daniel knew that if he kept him here, Storm would survive, but he wouldn't be free. And there was something about that realization that didn't sit right in his chest. With a final glance at the foal, he pulled the stall door open. Storm hesitated for half a second, then bolted. The foal's legs wobbled slightly as he ran. But the moment his hooves hit the open field, the hesitation was gone. He ran with everything he had, straight toward his mother. The mare rushed forward, meeting him halfway. Her powerful body lowered as she nuzzled her lost foal. The relief in her movements was undeniable. Daniel stood motionless, watching them reunite, a mix of emotions pulling at his chest. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. The band shifted, moving around the pair, their presence protective. The stallion at the front, likely their leader, snorted before turning back toward the trees. The others followed suit. Storm's mother nudged him toward the herd, urging him forward. The foal hesitated for a moment, his head turning back toward Daniel. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, Daniel swore he saw something in Storm's gaze, a flicker of understanding, a silent thank you. Then, without another sound, Storm turned and ran after the band, disappearing into the forest. Just like that, he was gone. Daniel let out a slow breath, his chest tight. He had done the right thing, he knew that, but why did it feel like he had just lost something? The ranch felt different after Storm left. The barn was quieter, the mornings emptier. Daniel told himself it was for the best, but the hollow feeling in his chest told a different story. He went about his daily routine, feeding the horses, checking the fences, tending to the land, but his mind always drifted back to the small foal he had pulled from the swamp. Weeks passed, and the land shifted from the cool breezes of early autumn to the bitter chill of winter. Daniel wrapped himself in an old coat as he stepped out onto the porch one evening. His breath fogged in the crisp air. The sun had set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The wind howled across the open plains, rattling the barn doors. In the distance, Shadow stood in the paddock, his ears flicking toward the darkness beyond the ranch. He was restless tonight. Daniel frowned. Something was off. The wind carried a sound, distant but distinct, a whinny. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the tree line. The sound came again, carried by the wind, and then movement. A dark shape emerged from the trees, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Daniel squinted, his pulse quickening. The shape grew clearer as it stepped into the open. His breath caught in his throat. It was Storm, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, more figures appeared. The entire band of Mustangs had returned. Daniel stood frozen as the wild horses moved toward the ranch, their presence almost ghostly in the silver light. Why were they here? Why had they come back? Storm led the way, his body stronger now, his legs no longer shaky and uncertain. He had grown. The stallion at the back of the herd snorted, watching Daniel closely. The other Mustangs followed suit, their bodies tense but calm. They weren't afraid. They had come with purpose. Storm stopped a few feet from Daniel, his dark eyes meeting his once more. The same eyes that had looked back at him the day he left. A silent understanding passed between them, and Daniel realized in that moment that Storm had chosen to come back. The foal had found his family, but something had pulled him back here. Maybe it was unfinished business, or maybe it was something else entirely. Daniel took a slow step forward. The cold air stung his skin as he stared at the sight before him. Storm had returned, but he hadn't come alone. The entire band of Mustangs stood in the moonlit field, their breath fogging in the cold night air. Storm, now visibly stronger, stood at the front, his body poised with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. His mother was just behind him, along with the dominant stallion who led the herd. But something about the way they lingered made Daniel uneasy. Wild horses didn't just come back like this. They didn't return to humans once they were free. So why had Storm? A silent understanding. Shadow let out a deep nicker from the paddock, shifting uneasily. He sensed something big was happening. Daniel took a slow step forward. The band didn't move, their dark eyes reflecting the moonlight as they watched him closely. His gaze fell on Storm. "What are you doing here, kid?" Daniel muttered under his breath. The foal let out a soft whinny, stepping toward him. It wasn't hesitant, it wasn't fearful. It was deliberate. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Storm had spent weeks back with his kind, growing stronger, learning the ways of the wild. He should have forgotten about the man who pulled him from the swamp, but he hadn't. Storm had chosen to come back. The stallion behind Storm let out a deep, guttural snort. He stomped his hoof against the cold earth, his gaze locked onto Daniel. It was a test. The dominant stallion wasn't here to attack. He was here to see if Daniel was worthy. Daniel swallowed hard, understanding what was happening. The band had accepted Storm back into the wild, but Storm had never truly left Daniel behind. And now the Mustangs were waiting for his answer. Did Daniel have the heart to let him go again? Or was there something bigger at play? Something even the wild horses understood? Daniel let out a shaky breath. His gut told him to do what he had always done. Walk away. Let Storm return to his world. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to. He crouched down slowly, extending his hand toward the foal. Storm watched him for a long moment, then closed the distance. He pressed his muddy nose against Daniel's palm, exhaling softly. Daniel's throat tightened. This was Storm's choice. The stallion gave one last snort, then turned, leading the band back toward the forest. The other Mustangs followed. Storm did not. Daniel looked into the foal's deep, intelligent eyes and knew Storm had made his decision. The Mustang had found his place, and it wasn't in the wild. It was here with him. The wind howled softly through the valley as the band of wild Mustangs disappeared into the darkness. Their silhouettes blended into the vast wilderness. The stallion had led them away without hesitation, his hooves thundering against the cold earth, his herd following closely behind, all except one. Storm stood motionless in the open field, his dark eyes locked onto Daniel's. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold night air. He had spent his entire life believing that wild things should remain wild, that nature had a way of knowing what was best. But this time was different. Storm had made his choice. He wasn't just a lost foal anymore. He wasn't broken or afraid. He had found his way back, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel alone. The young Mustang took a hesitant step forward, then another. His legs, once weak and wobbly, now carried him with newfound strength. Daniel extended a hand, palm open, inviting rather than commanding. Storm hesitated, ears flicking forward. Then in a moment so subtle yet powerful, he stepped forward and pressed his nose into Daniel's roughened palm. That was it. No rope, no saddle, no command, just a silent agreement, a bond that didn't need words. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Guess you made up your mind? Huh, he murmured. Storm snorted softly, shaking his mane. Daniel smirked. Yeah, thought so. Shadow, who had been watching from the paddock, let out a deep nicker, as if acknowledging the decision. Daniel looked at the ranch behind him, then back at Storm. He had spent so much time thinking he needed to be alone, that his life was meant to be lived in solitude. But now he wasn't so sure. Storm had become more than just a rescued foal. He had become a part of the ranch, a part of Daniel's life. He still carried the spirit of the wild within him. He would never be fully tamed, and Daniel didn't want him to be. Some things weren't meant to be broken. Instead, Storm grew into his own, running free across the open fields during the day and returning to the barn at night. He had found a balance between both worlds, one foot in the wild, the other with Daniel. And Daniel? Well, he had found something too, a reminder that some bonds, no matter how unexpected, are meant to last forever. The young Mustang had shown him something he hadn't realized he needed, a reason to believe in something again. As Storm turned his head toward him, letting out a sharp, joyful whinny before kicking up his heels and bolting across the land, Daniel knew one thing for certain. Some souls are meant to run free, but that doesn't mean they have to run alone. As the band of wild Mustangs disappeared into the moonlit forest, Daniel stood in the cold night air, his breath visible in the frosty stillness. Storm, the young foal he had rescued from the swamp, had made his choice. He had returned to the ranch, not out of necessity, but out of a deep, unspoken bond with the man who had saved his life. The stallion and the rest of the herd had tested Daniel, waiting to see if he was worthy of Storm's trust. And in that moment, as Storm pressed his nose into Daniel's palm, the answer was clear. Storm had chosen to stay, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, and in that choice, Daniel found a new purpose. This story is a testament to the power of trust and compassion. It reminds us that even in the face of adversity, Kindness can bridge the gap between the wild and the human world. Daniel's selfless act of saving Storm, and Storm's decision to return to him, is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest bonds are formed not through force, but through trust. Storm had found a balance between the wild and the domestic, proving that some souls are meant to run free, but that doesn't mean they have to run alone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of courage and connection. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that even the wildest hearts can learn to trust. And let us know in the comments, have you ever experienced a connection with an animal that changed your life? Thank you for watching, and remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life.